It is 3 in the morning, and somewhere on a stretch of dark track, a freight locomotive is moving at 60 miles an hour. Inside the cab, the only light comes from a row of dim gauges and the glow of the headlamp, cutting through the fog ahead. The engineer's eyes are open, but just barely. His body wants one thing and one thing only: sleep. This is the moment nobody talks about when they picture the romance of the railroad. Not the whistle, not the wide-open country, not the thrill of a mile-long train under control. It is a fight against your own body, happening every single night all across the world. And tonight we are going to talk about why train drivers sleep in the locomotive, why that sleep is both inevitable and dangerous, and what the industry is doing or failing to do about it. Let's start with the core problem. Human beings are not built to be alert at 3 in the morning. Millions of years of evolution wired us to sleep when it's dark and wake when it's light. This is called the circadian rhythm, and it doesn't care what your job is or what your shift schedule says. Around 4 in the morning, core body temperature drops to its lowest point of the day. Reaction time slows, and the brain's natural instinct is to shut down, regardless of how important the task in front of you happens to be. But railroads do not run on a schedule that respects biology. Freight has to move at night because that's when there's less passenger traffic competing for the same tracks, and terminals and yards can move cars more efficiently with fewer trains crossing paths. Long-haul routes stretch across time zones, so a crew that starts in daylight can easily find themselves deep into their trip well after midnight. And unlike almost any other transportation job, a train cannot simply pull over to the shoulder of the road when the driver feels drowsy. There's no shoulder. There's only tracks, switches, signals, and whatever is waiting around the next curve. Investigators who study railway accidents around the world consistently point to fatigue as one of the most common and most preventable factors behind serious incidents. Crews missing a red signal, misjudging a curve, or simply not reacting in time when something appears on the line ahead. Now picture a typical shift. A locomotive engineer might report for duty at an hour most people would call the middle of the night. The trip could last 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours, winding through multiple states or provinces, with irregular start times that shift day to day. Unlike an office job, there's no fixed 9 to 5 here. One day you might start at 6 in the morning, the next at 11 at night, and the day after that you might be called in on just a few hours' notice because a scheduled crew member called in sick. Add long routes, freight congestion, unexpected delays waiting for another train to clear a single track, and you get a work rhythm that never lets the body settle into a stable sleep pattern. Sleep researchers call this kind of schedule a rotating or unpredictable shift pattern, and it's consistently ranked among the hardest schedules for the human body to adapt to. Harder in some ways than a simple permanent night shift, because there is no fixed routine to adjust around. And here is the detail most passengers never think about. Many crews don't return to their home depot after finishing a run. Instead, they lay over at a terminal station, sometimes hundreds of miles from home, in a small restroom or crew quarters, waiting to take a train back the next morning, or even that same night. For days at a time, an engineer's entire life can revolve around a locomotive cab and a rented bed in a building they don't own, in a town that isn't home. This brings us to where and how these crews actually rest. Most major terminal stations maintain dedicated crew rest facilities, modest rooms, sometimes shared, sometimes private, with a bed, blackout curtains, and not much else. Some are comfortable, quiet, and well-maintained. Others are little more than a converted office, with a cot pushed into the corner, close enough to the yard that shunting locomotives and coupling cars can be heard and felt through the walls at all hours. Railroads have official rules requiring crews to arrive for duty rested, and in many countries, regulators mandate a minimum number of consecutive off-duty hours between shifts. On paper, everyone is supposed to sleep enough before their shift. In practice, the body doesn't read the employee handbook. A crew member who just spent an off-duty period trying to sleep during broad daylight in an unfamiliar room with traffic and daytime noise outside often doesn't get real rest at all. Studies on shift workers consistently find that daytime sleep, even in ideal conditions, tends to be shorter and lower quality than nighttime sleep because it fights directly against the body's internal clock. So crews show up for their shift technically off the clock, technically rested according to the rulebook, but running on a sleep debt that keeps building, night after night, week after week. This gap between what the rulebook demands and what the human body can actually deliver is at the heart of the entire issue, and no amount of policy language can fully close it. So how do engineers fight to stay awake once they're in the cab and the whole train is depending on them? Every crew develops its own survival toolkit, often passed down informally from more experienced colleagues. Some railroads require engineers to periodically press an alertness button, a vigilance control device that will trigger an emergency brake application if it's not acknowledged within a set number of seconds, essentially forcing a physical response at regular intervals throughout the trip. Crews also use verbal call-outs, physically saying the name and status of every signal out loud as they pass it, forcing the brain to stay engaged, rather than drift into that dangerous glassy-eyed autopilot state, where the eyes are technically open, but nothing is actually being processed. Some stand up periodically, splash cold water on their face at a stop, or keep a window cracked open even in freezing weather. Anything to keep the senses sharp. Some keep a conversation going with their conductor for the entire trip, because two tired minds talking to each other are safer than one tired mind alone in silence. Coffee and caffeine are constant companions, though experienced crews will tell you caffeine only delays the crash, it doesn't prevent it. None of these tricks fully solve the problem. They only buy time minute by minute against a body that is quietly shutting down. And every engineer who has done this job long enough has a story about the moment they caught themselves drifting and didn't know how many seconds had actually passed. And this is why the stakes are so much higher than people assume. Compare a train to an airplane. A modern jet has an autopilot system that can hold altitude, heading, and even landing sequences with minimal human input, giving a fatigued pilot a much wider margin for error, along with a second and often third crew member trained to take over. A train, in most parts of the world, has nothing like that. The engineer is the system. If a signal changes, if a piece of equipment is fouling the track, if there's a vehicle stopped at a crossing, the response has to come from a human being immediately, with no autopilot layer standing between drowsiness and disaster. A driver who nods off for even 4 or 5 seconds at speed can miss a restrictive signal, fail to slow for a curve, or fail to see an obstruction until it's far too late to stop a train that can take over a mile to come to a halt at freight speeds. A car can brake in a few hundred feet. A loaded freight train cannot. That difference in stopping distance is exactly why every second of attention matters so much more on the rails than almost anywhere else in transportation. Railway safety investigators around the world have repeatedly flagged fatigue-related lapses as a recurring theme in serious incidents. Crews missing stop signals, trains overrunning platforms, and collisions where post-incident review pointed to a crew member who had, by every account, been awake far longer than they should have been, sometimes exceeding 16 or even 20 hours without meaningful rest. These cases don't always make international headlines, but within the industry they've become case studies, cited again and again in safety training, because the pattern repeats itself with painful consistency. Irregular scheduling, insufficient rest, a long, uneventful stretch of track that lulls the mind into a false sense of safety, and then a single moment of lost attention with consequences that can't be undone. Safety boards that investigate these events often note that no single person is entirely to blame. Fatigue is what investigators call a systemic issue produced by scheduling practices, staffing shortages, and operational pressure, not simply a matter of one tired worker making a bad choice. In response, railroads and regulators have started building better defenses. Fatigue risk management systems now try to model a crew member's likely alertness based on their recent sleep and work history before ever assigning them to a shift. using biomathematical models that estimate how alert a person is likely to be at a given hour based on their recent sleep pattern. Some locomotives are being fitted with driver monitoring cameras and sensors that track eye movement, blink rate, and head position, sounding an alert or even alerting a dispatcher the moment they detect the telltale signs of microsleep. Dead man's switches and vigilance devices remain a basic safety net across much of the industry, automatically applying the brakes if the crew stops responding for too long. Positive train control and similar automated overlay systems, now mandated on many major rail networks, can automatically slow or stop a train that's about to pass a signal it shouldn't, adding a critical layer of protection that didn't exist a generation ago. Scheduling reforms are also on the table in many countries. An ongoing push to guarantee predictable rest periods, limit the number of consecutive night shifts a crew can work, and give engineers more advance notice of when they'll actually be called to duty. None of these systems are perfect, and unions and workers themselves are often the loudest voices, demanding better rules, because they are the ones who feel the toll of this schedule every single week in ways that don't always show up in a safety report. So, the next time you're on a platform at midnight watching a freight train roll through without stopping, or lying awake yourself while a distant horn echoes across town, remember what's happening in that cab. A person is up there, fighting a battle most of us never have to face. Staying conscious, staying sharp, staying alive to every signal, every curve, every possible hazard, hour after hour, in the dead of night, often hundreds of miles from home, in a job that keeps the entire modern economy moving while remaining almost completely invisible to the people who depend on it. It's one of the most demanding jobs in the world, precisely because so much of the danger is silent, boring, and repetitive right up until the one moment it isn't. So here's a question worth sitting with. How many other essential jobs are quietly running on the same razor's edge between human limits and public safety? And how much are we as a society actually willing to invest in scheduling, technology, and rest to close that gap before it costs us more than we can ever take back? Video description. Inside the exhausting high-stakes reality of why train engineers fight sleep every night and what the railroad industry is doing about it. Tags: train engineer fatigue, railway safety; locomotive engineer, sleep deprivation at work; night shift dangers, railroad documentary, fatigue risk management.